Hello, in this video I would like to show you how the wetness maps work in Wicked Engine. I opened this island level from the FPS sample to demonstrate this, but you can also try these on just a regular terrain that you generate yourself. So what are the wetness maps? The wetness maps can be enabled per object and tell for each part of the object whether those parts are wet or not. For example, this rock has wetness maps enabled, as well as this rock. As you can see, where it is under the water, the rock gets more wet. But this wetness map is a simple effect that just modifies the surface roughness and darkens the surface a bit under the water. To test this, grab the objects by clicking on it and drag it under the water and then pull it up. You can see that those parts that got underwater got wet immediately, but if you wait for a bit, then they will dry out eventually, slowly. As you can see, the upper part of the rock already dried out a bit, but those parts that remained underwater, they remain wet. And this dry out speed is also modulated by the surface slopiness, and so parts that are more slopy dry out faster, and parts that are more horizontal, those dry out more slowly. To disable this effect, go to the object of the selected object, the object settings, and simply click on the wet map checkbox to enable and disable it. So if you disable it, then the wetness will not affect this object, which is by default for every regular object that you import into the level. If you enable it, then immediately the object will be wet underwater. For objects that you don't import but are generated as part of the terrain, these are the objects such as these terrain chunk objects. They will have wetness maps enabled by default, and you can see that by just looking at the surface that appears from beneath the waves. Perhaps this is not very visible on this particular example, because this is a per vertex effect and the terrain is not very detailed. Then this is not as visible as on the rocks, for example. But let's filter to the weather entities, select the weather, and from the weather settings scroll down to the ocean sliders, and there is a water level slider that you can adjust. Once I pull it down, then you can already see that the parts that were underwater are wet, and the parts that were above the water, they are dry. And perhaps that's best visible if you look at the sun's specular highlight on the surface, which gets more sharp and shiny on wet surfaces, and it fades out on the dry surfaces. Well, now already this part kind of dried out, but if you go down to the water, then you can see that this part remains wet. And then now if I increase the water level again with this slider, you can see that the terrain surface gets wet on those parts again. The other thing is the grass of the terrain, which is generated automatically for you, and if you increase the water level up to the grass level, then the grass also gets wet. The wetness on the grass is only a darkening effect. It will not have specular reflections, only because I found that it doesn't look very good with these kind of shiny reflections on the grass. Apart from the ocean water, the rain will also modify the object's wetness. For example, go somewhere around here on the land, and enable the rain effect from the weather. Scroll up a bit on the weather settings and find the rain amount slider. If you increase this slider, then it will start to rain. And once it starts to rain, the objects that have wetness enabled on them and the grass will all get wet. Only on those parts where the rain falls. So the rain is actually just a small area following the camera. So like a particle system following the camera. So mostly those parts will get wet that the rain particle system kind of touches. But the interesting part about this is that the rain will not fall under the trees. For example, as you can see, this tree blocks the rain by itself, just automatically. You don't have to do anything for this to work. You can see that under the tree the grass is not wet and the terrain is not wet, so it's kind of lighter and it's not as shiny. Maybe a bit shiny because it doesn't completely 100% block the rain, but just a bit. But the effect is kind of clearly visible, not only on the wetness map, but if you just go under it with the camera, you can see that the rain particles don't show up under the tree, only outside the trees range. And this effect is done a bit similarly to shadow mapping. So the depth map of the objects are rendered from a top-down perspective, and the rain droplets check whether they can fall under those depth values, and that's basically a simple effect of how this is achieved. Anyway, there are many more rain parameters. For example, you can also increase the increase the rain speed or decrease it. You can increase the particles scales, or the scale of the rain splashes that appear on the ground or on objects that the rain hits. Anyway, that's what I wanted to show about the rain. Let's stop the rain for now. What I also wanted to say is that of course this doesn't only work on static objects. This wetness map will work on any kind of objects, but even the grass is not static, as you can see that you can just touch the grass and it behaves kind of dynamically. But also not on the grass, but on dynamic skinned character objects. For example, the wetness map also works. So in the character controller sample, by default I enabled the wetness map for the characters, even though in that simple level there is no water to test it on, but I modified the sample a bit to load this level. So to do that, just go to the character controller Lua sample, and where you see the level.wi scene, I just rewritten it to the island.wi scene, and that makes it load the island level instead of the default test level. Let's close this level and open the character controller sample. So as you can see, it dropped me into this FPS island level, and you can test on the character this way the wetness map's behavior. The parts of the character that get underwater, those parts will get more wet, a bit darker and a bit shinier. This shinerness maybe doesn't look as great on this character shader, the cartoon shader. It would look better on a physically based material, but this is already, you can already see how the effect works on a skinned character. So there is absolutely nothing against skinned characters with this effect. It will just work out of the box once you enable the wetness map on the character's objects. So that's kind of what I wanted to show in today's video. I hope you found it interesting, and try out the wetness map for yourself. See if there is any difficulties for you to work with this, and report them if you find anything wrong with it. Okay, that's it. See you in the next video.